Hey, in this video, I'm going to show you
The mother of all prompts.
I'm going to show you the only prompt you will ever need for the rest of your life. Well, okay, I know that's a little clickbaitish, but we'll have fun trying. See you in a minute. Hi, everyone. Antonio of Thornton, the Profit Engineer here, and welcome to another installment of Practical AI, where we help you and your company be faster, smarter, and better with the power of AI. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you not really about the mother of all prompts, but how about the mother of all prompt frameworks? All right. So a lot of people ask me all the time, what's the best prompt to use for blank? And the unfortunate reality is that it's impossible to answer that question because you're going to have different context in someone else, even if two people are running the same types of businesses. One coach has one way of approaching their business. Another financial advisor has a way of approaching their business. So there's no real one prompt that works for all. And as an aside, if you ever see any crappy ebook out there that says 7,000 prompts for businesses, please run the other way. It's trash, believe me. So let me tell you why. Well, just like I mentioned, there are too many nuances that go into prompting AI in order to get real results. And those huge prompt documents, they are just very generic prompts. In fact, let you in on a little secret, a lot of them just use ChatGPT to write the book for ChatGPT, and you're just really getting regurgitated stuff that's going to give you real, trash at the end of the day. And there's a terminology that we used to use years ago in the systems engineering and programming space. The term was GIGO, G-I-G-O. And what it stood for was garbage in, garbage out. And that's really the same thing that you're probably experiencing now with ChatGPT. When you're programming a computer for whatever reason, whether it's hardware, software, whatever, when you're programming a computer, it does, for the most part, what you tell it to do. So if you're telling it to do the wrong things, it's going to do the wrong things. Most times it doesn't just come up with stuff. Now, the interesting thing about generative AI is that it does come up with stuff. So you have to actually teach it not to do that. And I'm going to talk to you about that today. And with that being said, not all prompts are created equal, but I'm going to show you a framework that you can use that will help you get probably 10 times the results that you're getting right now, and probably closer to what you will ever get for prompting generative AI, whether it's ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, whatever the case may be. This prompt framework will do you a lot of good. So let's get started. So the prompt framework that I use is called RICER, and RICER, R-I-C-E-R. RICER stands for roles, instructions, context, examples, and rules. So let's start out with roles and why role is important. Now, one of the great things about generative AI is that you have access to virtually an unlimited amount of data. Now, one of the bad things about generative AI is that you have access to virtually an unlimited amount of data. Now, why is that good and both bad? Well, number one is that having access to this information gives you a lot more advantages than you would on your own, having to read all the books in the world, having to read all the blog posts in the world, right? So there's that. But because there's so much information, there's something we have to take in consideration. There's good information, there's bad information, there's right information, there's wrong information. There's varying levels of depth around that information. So because of that, you may have a very different need for that information in whatever your application is. So when you assign ChatGPT a role, you now tell it, for the most part, ignore all the information that's not relevant to what I need it for. So for example, if you're writing sales copy, you might say, act as a copywriter. Now, you may have heard those types of things before, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. But let's say you're writing a social media post. You might say, act as a social media post. And what that does is then it starts looking for and identifying just the information that's dealing with writing social media posts. Now, with that, you want to go a little bit deeper and really tell ChatGPT or Claude or whatever what role you want it to have. So instead of saying act as a copywriter, you might say act as the world's best copywriter. Now, to go even deeper, you might even go as far as saying act as the world's best direct response copywriter. So that type of thing now helps ChatGPT or helps your generative AI to ignore all the other things that might not be the good information. And believe me when I tell you, ChatGPT, Claude, it knows the difference between good and bad information. Now, you might think, well, why doesn't it just give me good and bad information? Well, it's because you didn't ask it to. Now, one of the things I say is that you want to look at AI and prompting almost like you would talking to a fifth grader. Sometimes, if you told the fifth grader, hey, go to the store and get some groceries, they're liable to come back with anything. So, you think about it, you have to tell them what store to go to, you have to tell them what things to get, give them money, have them come back, etc. I don't know who's sending a fifth grader to the grocery store, but hey, no judgment. Anyway, with that being said, you have to be very clear on the instructions. So with that, when you're defining a role, you're telling your AI who you want it to be, and you want to be as detailed as humanly possible. So you might say, act as a world-class copywriter who writes in the style of J. Abraham, Dan Kennedy, Dan Sullivan, David Ogilvy, whatever the case may be. So it's your job now to really think about, what role do you want this person to play? Do you want this person to play just a generic random copywriter, or do you want this AI to play the role of a world-class copywriter? So that's what you do when you're defining your role. And again, you want to be as specific as you possibly can when you're defining that role, so that it starts ignoring all the other information and focuses on the data and the content that you are looking for. So next up is instructions. You want to tell it what you want it to do. One of the ways I tend to start out is, your job is blank. And then I start filling in the blanks about what I wanted to do. Your job is to write an engaging social media post of this 200 words to 500 words for LinkedIn, with a call to action to get my target audience to respond to this message. So you want to get as detailed as you possibly can when you're telling it what you want it to do. And these instructions, again, just like with that fifth grader that you're sending to the store, you want to tell them very clearly what you want to do. So if we're going to go back to the role and that fifth grader going to the store, you might say, hey, listen, I want you to act like a responsible young adult and go to the store and come right back. So that's kind of the same thing. So with instructions, you're getting a lot more detailed. I want you to go down the street. I want you to make a left. I want you to go down to the store. Once you go into the store, you're going to go to the aisle that has so-and-so, and then you're going to get that. You're going to go to the counter and come back. And those instructions are so powerful when it comes to ChatGPT, when it comes to Claude and whatever other generative AI application you're using. And what comes up for me a lot of times when I talk about instructions is the glass of water exercise. You may have heard of the glass of water exercise, where someone says, I want you to write down the instructions of getting a glass of water. Some people would just say something as simple as, get up, go get a glass of water. Well, there are a lot of steps in between those two things. So let's say, for example, if you're in your living room, you may need to get up from your couch. You may need to walk to the kitchen. You may need to move something out of the way. You need to open the cabinet. You need to get a glass and, grab it with this amount of force. And you need to put it on the counter. And then you need to take it over here. You need to do. So there are literally dozens of individual instructions that are required in order for you to get a glass of water. And you want to think about generative AI in that same way. The more detailed you are, the more instructive you can be, the better your results are going to be. Now, let me just say this. There are some times where you don't have to get into this amount of detail, but when you're looking to get the results that you're looking for, this is the best framework you can use. Now, let me give you an example of where you might not need to use the RICER method. Let's say you had a list of 50 names and you wanted to put it in alphabetical order. You don't really need to go into grave detail to say, take this list of names and put it in alphabetical order. Now, you may want to add something like, don't add any, don't delete any, don't change the spelling. And if it's first and last name, you might say, order it by first name, order it by last name, something of that nature. But you won't need to get into this much detail. But when you are looking to get the results you want to consider the RICER method. So with that being said, let's move on to the next letter, which is C, and that is context. Context is, oh my gosh, it is everything when it comes to generative AI, is when you are able to tell it the context of why you want the information, what you're planning on doing with it, who is it for, what format you need it, all those types of things. The better context you can give it, you're going to be amazed at how great the results you get. So, for example, going back to a social media post, this coach might be a relationship coach. This coach might be a life coach. Very similar, but different context when you're talking about writing a social media post. So this life coach or relationship coach might say, hey, write a social media post about helping a dad who's going through a hard time with his wife and kids, help him reintegrate into his family. A life coach might even be writing about the same topic but from a different perspective. So a relationship coach's context is going to be different than the life coach's context. So even if it's the same topic, the same subject matter, the context will change the article or change the content completely. Absolutely completely. Now, what do you want to think about when you're talking about context? Well, who are you talking to? So if your context is a married man with children, that's going to be a very different article than a single man with no children. If you're talking to a 50-year-old who's been married for 30 years, the context of that article is going to be very different than a 25-year-old who's been married for 5 years. So context matters. Context matters when you're instructing a GPT or a generative AI application to do what you want it to do. So think about as much as you possibly can around why, the who, the what, the when, the why, the where, right? So think about that when you're creating context, because that's going to help you get better results. Now, examples. This is one of the things that I find a lot of people skipping over. And can you get away with skipping over examples? Sure, why not? But the better information you give to any AI application, the better your results are. Remember what I said earlier? GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And that also stands for another form of GIGO: good instructions, great outcome. Okay? Good instructions, great outcome. So when you think about that, when you're telling someone to do a thing and you can show them an example of that thing, they're more likely to match your examples. They're more likely to get you closer to what you're looking for. So whenever you have an example available, use it. Even if it's not yours, you can find someone else who has something similar to what you're looking for, and you can use that for creating an example for whatever you're doing. So if you're saying, I want a social media post, you can take examples of great social media posts that you have found and use that as examples. Because again, you're giving the AI more to work with and having it ignore the things that's not relevant. And this is so critical, because when people talk about, oh, the AI is making up this and making up that, one of the reasons, it's not the only, but one of the reasons why AI makes up a lot of stuff is because we don't give it the parameters to work within. So it's got access to all this data, so it's going to use all that data. You have to tell it what to do and what not to do. Now, before I get into the last one, I want to take a quick sidebar here. I'm going to tell you something about the RICER prompt that has been transformative for me. There's a book I read called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, if I'm not mistaken. And that book, oh my gosh, blew my mind. It talks about the idea and the concept of taking ownership and responsibility for everything, regardless if it's your fault or not, but taking responsibility for everything around you. This works especially if you're in the management position, if you're a CEO, CFO, any time where you have people who are counting on you or that you are instructing. This is a phenomenal book. But this is one of the things that actually helped me create the RICER prompt, is understanding the concept of extreme ownership. One of the things that Jocko talks about in that book is when you are telling someone what to do, you're responsible for the results that you get. Now, you may say, well, they go mess up and do this other thing, well, then that's their fault. Well, that's not taking extreme ownership. The idea of taking extreme ownership is that you are responsible, whether directly or indirectly. Directly meaning that you've given them bad instructions or you've given them incomplete instructions and they've given you bad results. Or maybe they're not the right person, but who's responsible for hiring them? You are. Who's responsible for giving them the task? You are. So you have to take full ownership of that. And that's exactly what we're doing with the RICER prompt, is that we're taking full ownership to assume that ChatGPT is just going to do whatever it wants to do. So we have to give it the parameters. So, and I'll just share a quick aside. One of the things that they talk about in the book is this game that you can play as a leader, as a manager, and I'm gonna butcher this, so forgive me. But it's the game is that if you get questions, you lose, and that's pretty much it. And I guess I'm probably not explaining that as clearly as I should be. But the idea of it is this: when you get questions from your subordinates, from your employees, from your contractors, you take that as an L, because with the extreme ownership concept is that you should anticipate the questions they have. You should anticipate the things that they may mess up on. You should anticipate the things that they may get confused about, and give them the instructions in advance. And I got to say, once again, I'm not not making any money from it. If you're in a leadership position, I definitely recommend that book. But I can tell you for sure, it really changed my relationship with my employees. It changed the relationship with my contractors, even my relationship with friends. I communicate in a much more succinct way, and it because I'm constantly thinking, how could this be misinterpreted? How could this be messed up? How could this be confusing? And I'm doing as best I can to be proactive and giving instructions in advance in order to avoid getting those questions. So with that being said, here's the thing you want to take in consideration. Very rarely will ChatGPT or Claude ask you clarifying questions. Very rarely. Sometimes it will. Sometimes they will. But for the most part, they won't ask you clarifying questions. It'll just do it wrong. And that's where you have to go back and understand the extreme ownership side of it, is that you want to be as clear as humanly possible in order to get the result you want from your generative AI. All right, so let's move on to the last one here, which is rules. This is a fun one. This is a fun one. Going back to that fifth grader going to the store, you might say, hey, when you get to the store, do not buy any candy. Or you might say, on your way back, do not stop over here, do not do that. That's exactly what the rules parameter for this prompt is telling ChatGPT, telling Claude, telling whatever your generative AI is what not to do. And you can give it some rules of what to do and what are other things. I tend to put that in instructions as much as I can, but what I like to do is I like to solidify the entire instruction thread with rules of giving it very, very strict parameters. So you might say, do not use emojis in your social media posts. You might say, always do blank. You might say, never do blah, blah, blah. And that methodology or that rule structure will again continue to define the space, if you will, that ChatGPT gets to run around in. It will define that through those rules. And I always shoot for between 3 and 4. Think about the things that you feel that are most important to you. You might say, follow the examples exactly. You might say, make sure the right that's in my voice. You might say, don't do whatever. There could be a whole multitude of things. Again, that goes back to how are you using the GPT for the results that you want. But creating those rules is a part of what helps to keep the GPT on track. It helps to keep generative AI from going all over the place and doing just random stuff and giving you bad results. And when you find yourself using this RICER method, I kid you not, you're going to start seeing 5x, 10x the results of the output that you get by using this framework. Now, most people are going to say, oh my gosh, that sounds like a lot of work. And here's the reality of it. It is. I have some prompts that are 2 and 3 pages long. And it's not because of me just being a super nerd, or maybe it is, but it's because I know what results I want to get. So I make sure to put all of the instructions in. Now, it's not for this video, but there are other ways you can do that by creating GPTs and creating projects in Claude in order to give the AI some additional instructions to always follow. But again, for another video. But in this case, if you're writing just a singular prompt for a task that you know you need to get the results that you want to get, this is one of the methods that you can use. Now, you can be as detailed or as casual as you want. You can have just one line for the role, just a couple of instructions and a couple of contexts. Kind of the way I look at it. The more important the outcome needs to be correct, you may want to look at it like this. The more important the output, the more time you want to put into the input, the prompt itself, in order to ensure that you get what you want from this prompt. Now, I'm going to jump over to actual ChatGPT here, and I'm just going to ask her a real quick question here. I'm going to say, what is the RICER prompting method? All right, so let's just see what ChatGPT has to say. I've been using this so much that sometimes it knows. RICER prompting measure structure approach to creating effective AI prompts. Yes. So I've been using this so much that it knows when I mention RICER. I've actually built a GPT using the RICER method. So and I'll be sure to share that in the description. But right here you can see example of RICER in action. Prompt to generate a business email role. Your professional business consultant specializing in email marketing. Instructions: write a persuasive email to a potential client explaining how AI-powered automation can improve their customer retention. Context: the client runs a wellness coaching business and struggles with follow-ups. Oh my gosh, that is exactly what I'm talking about when I say the context matters. Because if you're writing an email to a construction company who is missing calls, and you're building an AI chatbot to respond to their calls, that's going to be an entirely different email, So context matters. So then it provides an example. Hi, first name, I notice your wellness coaching business is growing. I wanted to share how AI can help you nurture your client relationships effortlessly, blah, blah, blah. Then rules: keep the email under 200 words. Use a friendly yet professional tone and include a clear call to action. This is a good, I'm going to say good, it's not great, but this is a good example of RICER. So you'll find that you will get closer to what you want. Now, I might say something like, you are a world-class business professional consultant with a specialty in cold email marketing, something of that nature, because again, that's going to change what you get. And you might say in the context, the potential client runs a wellness coaching business, has struggled with follow-ups, and we've never spoken before. This is an outreach from LinkedIn or whatever the case may be. And then, of course, it will create the context. So the RICER method, a fantastic framework that you can use. And here's the great thing about it. It works across all platforms. You can use this for GPT. You can use this for DeepSeek. You can use this for Perplexity. And here's one of the things that I will tell you. Since 4.5 came out, a lot of people are saying, oh, I'm getting horrible results with 4.5. Well, one of the reasons why is because they're talking to 4.5 like they've spoken with some of the older models. And the thing about 4.5 is that it needs really specific details because it does very deep research. So when you just tell it just broad generalizations, you're going to get broad general answers. So again, this works across every platform and across all models. Even some of the older models, you'll find you'll get better results using the RICER method. So hope this helps for those entrepreneurs and CEOs and whomever else out there using AI to actually get results. This RICER method is the bomb. So that's it for today's Practical AI. Antonio, the Profit Engineer, signing off. We'll see you next episode.